Anarchism, a word with ancient meaning and a lot to say. Yet, in modern society, it is quickly dismissed as something for people who wear a lot of black and have green or pink mohawks. Well, not today. The roots of anarchism show that it is a theory that originated from serious thinkers, in fact, by some of the most highly respected ancient philosophers. Early seeds of anarchism can be found in ancient China and Greece. In China, philosophical anarchism, so the discussion on the legitimacy of the state, was delineated by Taoist philosophers. And in Greece, Sophocles used the myth of Antigone to illustrate the conflict between rules set by the state and personal autonomy. Socrates questioned Athenian authority constantly, insisting on the right of individual freedom of conscience. Even the Stoics were supportive of a society based on unofficial and friendly relations among its citizens without the presence of a state. So let's not dismiss anarchism right off the bat, because really, who are any of us to dismiss Sophocles? Welcome to Rebel Economics. Today, let's push all images of burning cars and punks out of our heads. Anarchism is a theory like so many others, and while often it is not taken seriously, I want to use today's episode to see what type of economy the anarchists are proposing. How would their economic system work, and does it perhaps have some merits that tend to be overlooked and dismissed? Before getting elbow deep into anarchism, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. We would really appreciate it. So, what is anarchism? The word stems from the ancient Greek meaning without the ruler. And this in itself boils down to much of what we know about anarchism. It goes against authority, against a society with hierarchies. So, in the world we live in, there are some popular targets of anarchist critique: the state, the police, and business owners. They all present a form of ruling over others in a manner which to anarchists does not seem legitimate. While there are many different lines of anarchist thinking, this is one thing they all agree on. Since today we will focus on the economics of anarchism, the first two are kind of out of the running, but let's see what it says about business owners. Much like Marxism, anarchism too considers labor a form of exploitation. People put in the work, and yet they only receive a tiny fraction of the worth which they create. To anarchists, this is deplorable, and with that, the capitalist system cannot stand, as it can only be maintained through systematic exploitation. This is then reinforced by itself, as labor creates despotism and social hierarchies. These ensure that the exploitative nature of labor continues, as those who benefit from it are the recipients of both power and wealth. But beyond the labor, all forms of property are considered theft, according to Proudhon, one of the most famous anarchist thinkers. For example, charging someone rent would no longer fly, since the former landlord would no longer own the flat. You cannot charge someone for the access to the means of life, which is what a place to live is. So, since property as such no longer exists, and ownership based on buying something with money would no longer be the case. Instead, it would be need-based and usage-based. Living in a flat would make it temporarily mine as I'm currently using it, but this would not make me its owner. It does not give me rights to decide over it or demand something in return. Instead, the only right I have as a user of the flat is to use it. In this sense, the rights replace property rights, and personal possession remains only in the things you use. A quote by Alexander Berkman expresses this idea best. Personal possession remains only in the things you use. Thus, your watch is your own, but the watch factory belongs to the people. Land, machinery, and other public utilities will be collective property, neither to be bought nor sold. Actual use will be considered the only title, not to ownership, but to possession. The same is true for labor. The laborer retains a natural right in the thing he produces, even after he has received his wage. Thus, the wages are for the time and effort the worker put in, but not for the product he has created through this time and effort. Separating these two concepts from one another is very confusing when thinking about it in capitalist terms, which is the only way I was ever taught to think about things such as property and wages. Because why would you pay someone a wage if that, in the end, does not give you the right over what was produced? Well, that stems from thinking that there is some sort of business owner, which in the anarchist society would no longer be the case. So you may ask, if this is the case, then how is anything ever created? How do we end up getting the rights to use things we need, like bread or clothes? Well, collective labor creates collective ownership. In an anarchist economy, there would be something called universal self-management, where in your job, instead of having a boss, each individual is essentially the boss of their own work. Since the means of production are freely accessible, a form of industrial democracy would be created. And when anarchists talk about democracy, you can be pretty sure that we're talking about direct democracy. That each person has a vote which they cast directly, instead of a representative democracy, which most of our political systems are. Yes, everyone in the eligible electorate gets a vote, but we vote for people who will then represent our views. So a referendum is the most common example of direct democracy in our political system. In an anarchist society, direct democracy would surpass the political sphere and also take place in the economic sphere, creating an industrial democracy. To Proudhorn, workplaces are the common and undivided property of all those who take part therein, rather than companies of stockholders who plunder the bodies and souls of the wage workers. So every worker that is helping to produce a certain product would have an equal right to the output, no matter if you are the accountant or the person standing at the machine. Everyone involved is equally responsible for the output, and therefore equally entitled to the output. Therefore, instead of companies, people would work in the form of associations or cooperatives. Every individual employed in the association would have an undivided share in the property of the company, as well as the right to fill any position. All positions are elective and therefore subject to the approval of the members. So people would come together for the production of a product and together decide who does what, managing the company as a cooperative where no hierarchies exist and everyone gets an equal say in the operation. These associations in turn can choose to form a federation to reduce risk by creating solidarity, mutual aid, and support. Since all industries are interrelated, it makes sense for them to support each other. This would remove the distinction we currently have of private and public sectors. Since in anarchism, everything is public. People working for things which are often under national control, or at least in part, like rail services, education, or healthcare, would be under public management, just like everything else, which in capitalism is considered private, like factories for clothes or shoes or bakeries. Private no longer exists. Instead, everything is under the public control, because each association is controlled by the people that work in it. Apart from privately owned companies going over to public management to create new associations, capital would still be needed. That is where the bank comes in, providing loans, and that too is true for anarchism. At least for me, I never thought of the possibility of there being an anarchist banker, so having read about a bank in anarchism really surprised me. But there would be a so-called people's bank. Like everything else, it would be managed as a cooperative and give out loans to others that would want to form a new association. But in contrast to the capitalist system, an anarchist bank would only charge interest rates for covering costs, therefore being near 0%, basically representing free credit. This is part of the type of anarchism called mutualism. Neoclassical economists criticize this system by arguing that there would be a problem of inflation, as mutual banks would increase the money supply by creating credit. However, the counter on the part of anarchists is that this would not happen, since the credit would not simply be created, but rationed for worthwhile projects, which are expected to produce more goods and services. A common understanding of the system and the role of each and every one without any form of hierarchy is at the core of the anarchist system. The socialization is important so that no one would attempt to take advantage of the lacking hierarchies. The common belief of everyone being equal would uphold the system, which makes everyone equal in turn. So it is a case of if you believe it, it will be true. And while that may seem like a very wobbly system, we should all remember that to some extent we are already part of such a system. We believe in our economies, we believe in our money, our currencies, despite there not being anywhere close to enough gold reserves to back it up. If everyone lost faith in our banking system today and took out their money, the system would collapse too. So, to some extent, it is too being held up by our beliefs in it. There are many anarchist communities all around the world. They are separate from the capitalist system, setting themselves up as self-sufficient entities. They produce their own food, their own furniture, and their own homes. There even is one in Denmark that is squatting in a former military complex. How is that for irony? Many of these communities have around 100 members, and those larger than that are often split up amongst different areas, like the Rebel Zapatista autonomous municipalities in Mexico. For me personally, I believe that these communities may be quite successful on their own, but I also believe that their success lies in their relative small size and self-selection of members. You can place a lot of trust in these other people in your community. They are there because they believe in the anarchist system. But if you imagine it on a national level, with hundreds of thousands of people involved, that may not be so easy. Thank you for watching Rebel Economics. Personally, I learned a lot about anarchism from researching today's episode, so I hope you learned something too. If you enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate every single feedback we get from you. And if you want to watch more, why not check out our video talking about some of the ways in which Amazon is exploiting its retailers. Or check out the complete opposite of what we talked about today. Instead of anarchism and no government, what would happen if we all worked for the government? Thanks for watching and see you next time.